when we're done here today, maybe you can tell me whether this was a good deal or a bad deal that the Reubenites and the Gadites and half of the tribe of Manasseh made with Moses and God. But we certainly see deal-making in action here, don't we? The leaders of these tribes went to Moses to suggest that they not cross the Jordan and settle there in the land of Canaan because they had lots of sheep and cattle, and the lands of Jazer and Bashan and Gilead were perfect for grazing. Now that region stretched from the border with Moab on the south all the way to what is now the Golan Heights on the north, which at one time was part of Syria. And all of this land was taken in that battle that we talked about weeks ago with the Amorites and the Bashan, I never get that right, the Bashanites. And it included the plains of Moab and Gilead and Bashan, and as we heard earlier, Jazer. And the people, this party that went to talk to Moses about this, seems shocked at how Moses responds to this. Moses blew a gasket right there in front of the high priest. He compared them to the Israelites who refused to go into the land of Canaan when God first ordered them to do so. And he reminded them of how God punished their parents for their lack of faith and for their disobedience, decreeing that no one aged 20 or older, except for Joshua and Caleb, would get into the promised land. He accused them of cowardice, suggesting that by taking the land on the east side of the Jordan that had already been conquered, they would leave their fellow Israelites, the other 9.5 tribes, to go and fight for the land on the west side of the Jordan. Now, we don't really know what the source of Moses' rage was. It could have been a combination of factors. It could have been 40 years of disappointment. It could have been the wasted generation, knowing that all the people, or almost all the people he brought out of Egypt, were never going to get to their destination. It may have had its roots in the fact that Moses had brought the people all this way and he wasn't going to get in, and now there are people who have the opportunity to go in and they're taking a pass on it. Or it could be that the first generation in the desert sinned. And Moses was afraid that the next generation was just going to follow in the footsteps of their fathers and make the same mistake, and that no one would get to go in because of it. Especially if they managed to persuade the other Israelites to settle on the east side of the Jordan, sort of that bird in hand is worth two in the bush adage. But God had promised his people so much more. Why would they settle? Moses feared that his people were losing faith again, and he had so much more faith in this generation than in the first. They might actually reject God's good plan for them. And he reminds them in verse 8, this is what your fathers did. And then in verse 14, he calls them a brood of sinners, as Jesus called the Pharisees a brood of vipers. Now, what happened next may have been clarification, or it may have been backpedaling. I'll leave that to you to decide. But the leaders of Reuben and Gad responded with a promise that their men would join their fellow Israelites in going into Canaan, conquering the land, and then they would move back to their families and their flocks that they had left behind. They insisted that this was their plan all along. But it is interesting that they did not make this commitment as part of the initial offer. They upped the ante by agreeing to Moses' terms after he read them the Riot Act. Now, this is for you husbands in the congregation this morning. How many of us have announced that we're going fishing, or to shoot some pool, or to watch the ball game at a friend's house. And then our wives remind us that the leaves need to be raked, or we promise to paint the garage. And we jump back, well, of course. We always start with the words, of course, don't we? Of course I was going to do that before I went to do whatever, right? So what's the truth? And of course there, I just did it. We insist that that was our plan all along. I don't know whether they were sincere about this or not. But from bitter experience, I can tell you it doesn't sound genuine. Nevertheless, Moses agreed to the new terms and told them that God would hold them to those terms. If you do what you say, you may return to the land you requested. But he also gave them a stern warning that their sin would find them out if they did not follow up and join their fellow Israelites in taking Canaan. Moses' decision does teach us something, though, and that is that their victory is God's victory. You will go before the Lord. You will go and take the land before the Lord. The Lord is driving the troops into battle and will give them their victory. Going into battle is a confirmation that they believe God will do this, that they have faith in God's faithfulness to his covenant promises. Hanging back and not joining in is a sign of a lack of faith. Well, the tribes moved into Gilead, and they chased out the Amorite residents, and they renamed all the towns and cities, and they built homes for their families and their flocks, and they joined their Israelite brothers in crossing the Jordan and taking Canaan. But why did they try to make a deal with Moses and with God in the first place? It could have been pride. It could have been a sense of entitlement, because Reuben was the firstborn of Jacob's sons, and so, at least in the tribe of Reuben, they might have thought, well, we should get our pick of where we want to settle. Or it could have been rebellion, or maybe it was just pragmatism. Were they really turning up their nose at God's gift? Did they really forget the past and were therefore doomed to repeat it? Did they convince themselves that the land they wanted was conquered with God's help, so God must consider it part of the promised land? That could have been what they were thinking. Or was it simply reluctance to rise to their spiritual destiny, to take a hold of everything that God had for them and everything that God wanted them to be? It has been said that good is the enemy of the best. Well, regardless of their reasoning or their sincerity, in the end, their choice was short-sighted. When the enemies of Israel attacked in later years, Reuben, Gad, and that half-tribe of Manasseh bore the brunt of the attack. They took the first hit because they did not have the Jordan River to protect them from their enemies on the east. The river that they did not want to cross could have offered them protection. And what is interesting is today, that part of ancient Israel, with the exception of the Golan Heights, which is forever being contested, is not a part of modern Israel. It's part of Jordan. Almost all of the land that they made that deal for, they eventually lost and never recovered. And so there may be a lesson in that for us. How often do we as Christians try to negotiate with God's will? Lord, I think I'll take the easier route, okay? Or the more comfortable way, rather than doing the hard work of just obeying. How many shortcuts do we take? Think of the rich young ruler in Luke 18. He kept God's law pretty much to the letter, but he could not go the extra mile that Jesus was asking of him. Go and sell everything you have and give the money to the poor. And what do the Gospels tell us about that man? He went away sad because he did not fulfill his spiritual destiny. And how sad it is for us too, when we know what God expects of us, what God has in store for us, what God is calling us to do, and we try to negotiate what seems to be a better deal for us. Paul wrote to the Colossian Christians in our New Testament lesson for today, "For this reason, since the day we heard about you, we have not stopped praying for you and asking God to fill you with the knowledge of his will through all spiritual wisdom and understanding. And we pray this in order that you may live a life worthy of the Lord and may please him in every way, bearing fruit in every good work, growing in the knowledge of God, being strengthened with all power according to his glorious might, so that you may have great endurance and patience, and joyfully giving thanks to the Father, who has qualified you to share in the inheritance of the saints in the kingdom of light. For he has rescued us from the dominion of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of the Son he loves, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins." We have an inheritance. It is the inheritance of the saints, all of those wonderful people who lived and died in faith before us. We have the same inheritance. That is our spiritual destiny. Jesus has redeemed us and bought our forgiveness and has brought us into his kingdom of light. That's our spiritual destiny. Do we honestly think we can negotiate a better deal? Do we dare even try?